My name is Chloe, and if you had told me a year ago that a single night could shatter my entire life and rebuild it out of sharp, unforgiving glass, I would have laughed in your face. But before we dive into the dark, twisted turn my life took on my adoptive father's 50th birthday, take a quick second to comment down below. Where are you watching this story from today? I always love seeing how far these videos reach across the world. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single chapter of my journey. Now let me take you back to that fateful evening. The air in the grand dining room was thick with the scent of roasted meats, expensive wine, and unearned arrogance. My father, or rather, the man I had spent 22 years calling Dad, sat at the head of the mahogany table like a king expecting homage from his subjects. His name was Arthur, a man whose wealth was only rivaled by his cruelty. My stepmother and her spoiled children hovered around him, tossing costly, superficial gifts into his lap. Designer watches, imported cigars, key cards to sports cars. Arthur beamed at them, bathed in the warmth of their hollow adoration. Then came my turn. I didn't have a massive trust fund like my step-siblings. What I had was heart, or at least the foolish belief that love could be forged through effort. For 6 months, I had spent every spare hour meticulously stitching together a leather-bound journal containing handwritten letters, restored photographs of our family's early days before my mother passed, and detailed memoirs of the small, quiet moments we had shared. It was a piece of my soul wrapped in vintage parchment. I walked up to his seat, holding the box with trembling hands. "Happy birthday, Dad," I whispered, pressing the gift into his palms. Arthur unwrapped the box slowly. He lifted the journal, flipped through a few pages with a sneer growing on his aristocratic face, and then stopped. The air in the room temperature plummeted. "What is this trash?" Arthur's voice boomed, cutting through the background piano music. It's a memory book," I stammered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I spent months making it. You spent months collecting garbage." Arthur roared, standing up so fast his heavy chair screeched against the marble floor. "Look at what your brothers got me. Real gifts, valuable assets. And you hand me a book of cheap paper and dead memories? Dad, please!" Snap! The force of his hand striking my cheek was so hard my head whipped back, sending me stumbling into the edge of the table. A shockwave of heat radiated across my face, followed immediately by the sting of burning skin. The entire room went dead silent. Nobody moved. Nobody defended me. My stepmother simply took a slow sip of her champagne, a cruel, satisfied smirk playing on her lips. "You are a useless, pathetic disappointment, Chloe," Arthur spat, tossing the hand-stitched journal into the burning fireplace beside him. "You've been a leech in this house since the day you were born. Get out of my sight before I have the security toss you into the street where you belong." Tears blurred my vision as I watched the pages of my hard work catch fire, curling into black ash. The physical pain was nothing compared to the violent, tearing ache in my chest. I turned and ran. I burst through the heavy double doors, racing down the long gravel driveway, the night air bitter against my tear-streaked face. I didn't have my purse, my phone, or a coat, just the thin evening dress I wore and the burning imprint of a hand slap on my cheek. I ran until my heels snapped, stumbling onto the dark, desolate coastal highway that stretched far beyond the estate. Rain began to fall, torrential and unforgiving, soaking me to the bone within seconds. I collapsed onto the curb of the empty road, sobbing uncontrollably into my hands. My life was over. I had spent my entire existence trying to earn the love of a tyrant who viewed me as nothing more than an ugly stain on his pristine legacy. Headlights cut through the thick downpour. A sleek, pitch-black armored SUV glided to a silent stop directly in front of me. Before I could process what was happening, the passenger doors clicked open. 2 towering men in tailored black suits stepped out into the storm. I scrambled backward, terror seizing my throat, but they moved with terrifying military precision. "Please, no, leave me alone!" I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the thunder. They grabbed me by the arms, not roughly enough to bruise, but firm enough that escape was entirely impossible. They lifted me off the wet pavement and forced me into the luxurious leather interior of the vehicle. The doors slammed shut, immediately sealing out the sound of the howling wind and rain. I pressed myself into the far corner of the back seat, my body shaking violently from the cold, the terror, and the shock. "If you want money, I don't have any," I cried out, wiping rain and tears from my eyes. My family won't pay a ransom for me. My father hates me. A soft, deep chuckle reverberated through the dim cabin. From the shadow of the opposite corner, a silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored bespoke suit leaned forward. He had piercing blue eyes, an aura of unfathomable power, and a strange, unmistakable shadow of my own features reflected in his aged face. He reached out with a gloved hand, offering me a silk handkerchief. He looked at the raw red mark on my cheek, his eyes darkening with a terrifying ancient rage. "Arthur isn't your father, Chloe," the man said softly, his voice carrying the weight of a king declaring war. "He is merely a thief who took what belonged to me. Hello, dear. I am your real father." The words hung in the warm, leather-scented air of the SUV, heavier than the thunder shaking the coastal road outside. I stared at the man sitting opposite me, my chest heaving, rain dripping from my hair onto the plush carpet. "You're lying," I choked out, pushing back into the corner of the seat. "My father, Arthur, he's the only father I've ever known. My mother." "Your mother loved you more than her own life," the man interrupted gently, handing me a crystal glass of amber liquid. I refused it, so he placed it on the small mahogany console between us. Her name was Juliana. And 22 years ago, Arthur didn't just ruin lives through bad business deals. He stole you from me while I was fighting for my life in a coma following an accident he orchestrated. He pulled a heavy velvet folder from a side compartment and laid it open across his lap. Inside were yellowed hospital documents, official birth certificates bearing a seal I'd never seen before, and DNA test results from a prominent private lab. But more than the paper trail, it was the photograph attached to the inside cover that made my breath hitch. It was my mother. She was young, laughing, wrapped in the arms of the man sitting right in front of me. On her wrist was an heirloom silver bracelet, the exact same bracelet Arthur had locked away in his wall safe, telling me it belonged to an aunt who died before I was born. "My name is Victor," he said, his voice dropping an octave, cold and absolute. "And for 22 years I have rebuilt an empire from the ashes, waiting for the precise moment Arthur's greed would consume him. I monitored that house, Chloe. I watched him diminish you, turn you into a servant in your own home, while his stepchildren paraded around on my stolen wealth." Victor's eyes locked onto the angry red welt on my cheek. The tenderness in his demeanor vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, calculated fury that made the air in the vehicle feel razor-sharp. "He laid hands on you," Victor whispered. "He took your devotion, burned it in his hearth, and struck you down. He threw my journal into the fire." I sobbed, the grief bursting back to the surface. "Everything I built for him. He burned it. Then we will burn his world," Victor replied simply. "Every asset Arthur owns, his real estate portfolio, his shipping lanes, his personal accounts, was built on capital he embezzled from my family's estate while I was incapacitated. For years I allowed him to manage it, to grow it, to believe he was an untouchable titan of industry. Why? Because the higher a man climbs, the more agonizing the fall." He leaned forward, placing his warm hand over my shivering, wet knuckles. "You have two choices tonight, my daughter. I can pull this car over, hand you a check for $10 million, and set you up anywhere in the world where Arthur can never reach you again. You can live a quiet, comfortable life far away from his shadow." I looked down at my hands. My fingernails were raw, my dress ruined, my cheek throbbing with the memory of Arthur's palm, and the ringing laughter of my step-family echoing in that dining room. I thought about 22 years of walking on eggshells. 22 years of being told I was worthless, an unwanted charity case, a ghost in my own home. "And what is the second choice?" I asked, my voice suddenly steadying, the tears drying on my skin like salt. A slow, terrifying smile spread across Victor's face. "The second choice is that you come with me. You take your rightful place as my sole heir. We spend the next 6 months orchestrating the complete, undeniable ruin of Arthur and his entire spoiled bloodline. You won't just watch them fall, Chloe. You will pull the lever yourself." I looked up at Victor. In his icy blue eyes, I saw no pity. I saw recognition. I saw the same fire that had just been ignited in the pit of my stomach. A cold, ruthless hunger for justice. "Tell me what I need to do," I said. The transformation began that very night. Victor brought me to a secluded estate tucked deep within the mountains, a fortress of black stone and modern security systems. For the next half year, I didn't just recover, I evolved. Victor provided me with elite tutors, financial strategists, and corporate lawyers. I memorized every ledger, every hidden shell company, and every illegal offshore transaction Arthur had executed over the past 2 decades. We found the precise pressure points of his financial empire. While Arthur believed I had simply run away or perished on that stormy highway, not even bothering to file a missing persons report, I was quietly buying up his debt through anonymous holdings. I was turning his board of directors against him. I was feeding tips to federal regulatory agencies regarding his fraudulent tax shelters. Physical transformation followed. The timid, mousy girl with faded clothes and hesitant steps was replaced by a woman who walked with the authority of a storm. I learned how to speak, how to negotiate, and how to hold a room hostage with nothing more than a calm glance. Then came the day of the annual Global Heritage Gala, the most prestigious event of the year, where the city's elite gathered to flaunt their wealth. Arthur was set to announce his company's historic merger with an international investment group, a deal that would cement his legacy forever. Standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my dressing room, I smoothed down the fabric of my dress. It was a custom-designed silk gown the color of deep liquid silver. Around my neck sat a diamond choker worth more than Arthur's entire estate. Victor stepped into the room behind me, resting his hands lightly on my shoulders. "Are you ready, Chloe?" he asked softly. I reached up, touching the silver bracelet on my wrist, the one Victor had retrieved from Arthur's safe 3 weeks prior during a quiet midnight extraction. "He burned my past, Dad," I said, meeting my father's reflection in the glass with a sharp smile. "It's time to destroy his future." The grand ballroom of the Grand Regent Hotel buzzed with the hum of string quartets and the clinking of champagne flutes. The city's high society had gathered to celebrate Arthur's crowning achievement, the multi-billion-dollar merger of his firm, Vance Enterprises, into the global market. At the front of the room, Arthur stood on the elevated stage, radiating arrogance. Beside him were my stepmother, draped in diamonds bought with stolen funds, and my step-siblings, smirking at the press cameras. "Tonight," Arthur boomed into the microphone, his voice echoing across the crystal chandeliers, "we do not merely celebrate a merger, we celebrate an empire that I built with my own hands from nothing." The crowd applauded predictably. Arthur raised his hands to soak in the praise. "Before we sign the final contracts," he continued, "I want to thank my family, the true pillars of my success." "How touching," a voice rang out from the back of the hall. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom burst open. The music faltered. The chatter died instantly as hundreds of heads turned toward the entrance. I walked down the central aisle, the heels of my Christian Louboutin pumps clicking with absolute authority against the polished marble. My liquid silver dress caught every drop of light in the room, shimmering like molten steel. Behind me walked 4 men in dark charcoal suits, the lead counsel of the city's most terrifying financial litigation firm, led by Victor, who walked a half step behind my shoulder, allowing me to command the floor. Arthur's face drained of color. He blinked, staring at me as if he were seeing a ghost. "Chloe?" he muttered, his voice carrying through the open microphone. "What is the meaning of this?" "Security? Remove this girl immediately." "Security won't be touching anyone tonight, Arthur," I said, my voice smooth, cold, and effortlessly projecting across the silent room. I stopped at the foot of the stage, looking up at the man who had slapped me into the rain 6 months ago. "Unless, of course, they want to be named co-conspirators in federal fraud." My stepmother gasped, clutching her necklace. My stepbrother stepped forward angrily. "You pathetic little leech. You run away for half a year and think you can crash Dad's biggest night? I didn't even look at him." I kept my eyes fixed entirely on Arthur, whose knuckles were white against the podium. "You told the world you built this empire from nothing, Arthur," I said, stepping onto the stage stairs. "But you forgot to mention that nothing was actually 40% of my mother's estate, which you illegally seized while her true husband was in a medically induced coma." Murmurs rippled through the crowd of high society guests. Reporters began raising their cameras, flashbulbs popping like sudden lightning. "She's lying," Arthur shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "She's unstable. She left my house months ago after a mental breakdown." "Is that why you burned the birth certificates?" I asked softly, taking the final step onto the stage and standing face to face with him. "Is that why you hit me when I brought too close a reminder of the past into your house?" I turned toward the massive digital screen behind the stage, the one set to display the digital signing of the merger. I pulled a small black device from my clutch and pressed the single silver button on its side. The screen flickered, The merger branding vanished, replaced immediately by high-resolution scans of forensic accounting audits, bank transfer slips from offshore accounts, and the original unedited deed of incorporation bearing my real father's name. Beside the documents was a crystal-clear audio recording played through the ballroom's master sound system. It was Arthur's own voice, recorded 3 weeks prior during a private meeting with his CFO. "I don't care about the regulations. Bury the missing funds in the shell accounts. The girl is gone, her real father is dead, and nobody is coming to check the books." Panicked gasps echoed through the room. The flashbulbs became a blinding storm. Arthur turned to the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "As of 8 o'clock this morning," I said, turning back to the microphone and addressing the entire room, "the board of directors has officially voted to remove Arthur from his position as CEO. Furthermore, 80% of the company's shares have been acquired by the Sterling Group, owned and operated by my father, Victor." Victor stepped onto the stage, throwing a thick stack of federal subpoenas onto the podium right next to Arthur's shaking hands. "Your accounts are frozen, Arthur," Victor said coldly, leaning in so only the family could hear. "Your properties have been seized to pay 2 decades of back restitution. The estate, the cars, the trust funds for your stepchildren, all of it belongs to my daughter now." My stepmother let out a faint shriek as 2 federal agents in dark jackets entered the back of the hall, walking briskly down the aisle toward the stage. My step-siblings looked around in absolute terror, realizing in real time that their lives of unearned luxury had collapsed into dust within 5 minutes. Arthur collapsed back into his chair, looking up at me with wide, hollow eyes. The arrogant king had been stripped of his crown, his gold, and his dignity, left shivering in the ruins of his own hubris. I leaned down, resting my hands on the edges of his chair, bringing my face inches from his. "You threw my leather journal into the fireplace because you thought cheap paper had no value," I whispered, the red mark on my cheek from months ago feeling completely healed at last. "You should have kept it, Arthur. It's the only warm thing you'll have left when you're sitting in a cell." I straightened up, took my father's arm, and turned my back on Arthur forever. As the federal agent snapped the handcuffs around his wrists behind us to the sound of endlessly flashing cameras, Victor and I walked out of the hall and stepped into the cool night air, ready to finally take back the life that was always meant to be mine.